WPSU is your source for Penn State sports, Penn State research, Penn State community. But we can't do it without your support. Make a contribution today and get a DVD of your favorite Penn State show.
The president of Texas A&M University was director of Central Intelligence under the first President Bush. He recently turned down a White House request to return to Washington as the first director of national security. We had the opportunity to talk with him about his decision and about changes in the intelligence community after 9/11.
I think the biggest difference is, I'd say two differences. The first is in resources. The pre-9/11 intelligence community had not received a real budget increase since 1986, and they had been asked to do more and more with less and less. Within 3 years after I retired as director in 1993, CIA had 25% fewer people. The National Security Agency, which does signals intelligence, was even in worse shape. The clandestine service that does the human spying was 30% smaller. So you have a very constrained capability that is being asked to tackle more and more complicated tasks, where before with the Soviet Union we had one target. In the post-Cold War world, just in the former Soviet Union we had 15 or 16 targets. And then you overlay terrorism and the regional conflicts and everything else on that. So you had an intelligence community that was really pushed to the wall in terms of the resources it had available. Post 9/11, beginning in the spring of 2002, the money has basically been cascading into intelligence. And the problem is, and one of the problems that a lot of politicians don't understand, is that you don't turn on espionage and information gathering capabilities like a spigot. It will take 5 to 10 years to build the kind of capability that is necessary to provide our protection. But anyway, they don't have the resource constraints today. The second big difference is that before 9/11, from the very founding of CIA in 1947, there was a very bright red line between domestic and foreign intelligence operations. CIA, the divide was at the water's edge, the FBI, domestic, CIA, international. And what a lot of people saw as turf fighting and lack of sharing of information and so on was in fact the way the system was built, because of President Truman's concern that we not recreate in the United States a Gestapo or an NKVD, an all-encompassing intelligence power that had both domestic and foreign capabilities. What's happened since 9/11 is a fuzzing of that line in terms of sharing of information. And in some areas, it's very useful. I'll just give you one example. Before 9/11, if a grand jury heard testimony from a Justice Department witness that he was a terrorist and he had terrorist friends in Cyprus planning an attack on the United States, the FBI could not, by law, share that information with CIA because it was grand jury derived information. So CIA would never know about the two terrorists sitting in Cyprus. That limitation has been eliminated. So I think there's a much different set of connections among the different agencies today than existed pre-9/11.
Now, you mentioned the word turf battle just a moment ago, and just 2 years ago, Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld resolved to end what he called, quote, his near total dependence on the CIA, and he created a new spy network known as the Strategic Support Branch, which has quietly sort of established, sort of taken over some of the CIA's traditional responsibilities. What's your take on that move?
Well, I only know about what I've read in the newspapers, and I would say that there is, I actually had supported the creation of a human intelligence component in the Defense Intelligence Agency, a human spying organization or reconnaissance or whatever you want to call it, because many times the kind of information the military needs for a military operation is not the kind of information that a CIA case officer working overseas is going after. Our case officers are trying to recruit people in terrorist organizations, in hostile governments and so on to give us information. The kind of information that the military needs for an operation is what's the load strength of a bridge? What's the electrical, what's the communications network? Where are the nodes? They require what's the beach like? How big is the airport? What kind of runway does it have? Those kinds of information CIA has never collected except in the days when we did sort of basic intelligence. And so I think the idea of having military officers or a military cadre dedicated to providing intelligence support, human intelligence support to military operations of that kind is legitimate. Where I would be concerned is if they begin getting into covert action, recruiting agents and doing things like that, in part because there is no congressional oversight of those kinds of activities in the Department of Defense. And I also think those are the kinds of things where there needs to be coordination in the government to make sure people aren't stepping all over each other's toes.
Now, you directed Central Intelligence under the first President Bush, and you recently declined a request from White House to return to Washington as the first director of its newly established National Intelligence. This would take charge of all 15 intelligence agencies. As you talked a moment ago about the money, we're talking about a $40 billion a year intelligence budget. You said when you declined the offer, you said it was, quote, the most difficult and close decision of my life. What tipped the scales in favor of staying president of Texas A&M?
Well, I think it was two things. I think, first of all, it was my family. And second, we basically had no desire to go back to Washington, D.C. I'd been there almost 30 years. That was enough. And the other was I really like what I'm doing at Texas A&M. We have some interesting programs started down there. I like the people a lot, and I've started a lot of things, and I think I owe it to them to see them through.
Now, when George Tenet, a friend of yours, stepped down as director of CIA, you said, people cannot imagine the toll that job has on the people and their families. There are physical and spiritual costs that come with it.
Well, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that, that sort of surprises people, for years we had security people living in our house, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So our children grew up with armed people around all the time. I must say, when you have teenagers, that's not a bad thing altogether, but I think that being on call all the time, carving out time for family, the pressures of the position and so on, I think it does take a terrible toll on people.
We have just a couple of seconds remaining, but where do you believe the next real terrorism threat lies?
Well, I think that the most likely focus is going to be along the lines of the recent attacks we've seen, primarily overseas. I think we underestimate the success of our own government when we look at the fact that on September 12th, 2001, who would have predicted 3.5 years later there would not have been a single more additional successful attack here at home.
And on that note, we're out of time. Thank you very much for being with us.
My pleasure.
A copy of the program you've just seen can be purchased through Penn State Media Sales at mediasales.psu.edu or by calling 800-770-2111.